Recently, I've seen in the news that the whole issue of race is kind of like taking on a whole nother level. It's been with us for a while. I think for the last 8 or 9 years under the Obama administration, we've had the politics of personal identity. We've had, just a real ramping up of racial politics, gender politics. I mean, we have like transgender politics. But when it comes to the race thing, I've noticed recently that it's just taking on a whole nother level. And while I was watching an episode of Tucker Carlson last night, I have to tell you for the first time, I was really kind of confused. You had a college professor who was on, I guess he wrote a piece last week to the New York Times about how he's teaching his kids not to trust white people. He's teaching his children that, because of our history in this country, and the way that Americans of European descent have treated Americans of African descent, that, white people can no longer be trusted. And as he was talking to Tucker Carlson, the more he talked, the less he made sense. And it got me to thinking about this. And I want to ask you guys a serious question. I was interrupted by Facebook when I asked this question before. I hope I'm not interrupted again. Do you think America has a race problem? Seriously. Do you think that Americans are racist? Because that's all you're seeing on TV. And it's mostly coming from black folks. It's black folks that are accusing white folks of not understanding who they are, not wanting to be friends, not wanting to help them out, help black folks out with their problems. And somehow this is turned into a new racial hatred. And as I'm looking at all this, I'm just sort of bewildered because, I have parents who grew up in segregated Mississippi. I have grandparents who grew up, at the turn of the century. And the stories that they told me were horrific. The Jim Crow, the separate but equal laws, the struggles that they had to go through just to be, basic respect. My father's time in Korea, he spent in Korea and then came home and had to face racist things that, were demeaning. Through all of that, though, my parents never taught me to distrust or to hate white people. As a matter of fact, they were more along the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. line. We need to respect each other from the content of our character, not by the color of our skin. So what has happened that now that is completely reversed? How can we now get college professors saying that we need to judge people on the color of their skin instead of the content of their character? And I just want to point something out, my friends, because, we're seeing this from the Colin Kaepernick kneeling on the flag. And Colin Kaepernick, he said it was because of racial oppression and because of, police brutality. Now we have everybody else kneeling for their own different reasons. But even with that, racial injustice and brutality, really? Are we as bad off in 2017 as we were in 1945? Who really wants to argue that? And my problem here is you have people now doing this, in the New York Times and from college campuses across the country. In the 1950s, in the 1940s, you didn't have black people who were professors on college campuses writing these type of op-eds and ending up in, in the newspaper and on the radio and on the TV. You didn't have that. Why? Because it was racist. Now, from a position of comfort, from a position of influence, we have Americans of African descent who are still crying the blues, who are still talking about plantation mentality, who are talking about, how oppressed we are, and they're doing it from a Democrat platform. And that's what's so problematic to me, because I only see this when I turn on the television. I don't experience this in my life. My kids come home and they have friends who are Asian, they have friends who are white, they have friends who are black, they have friends who are mixed parentage. There is rarely any type of conversation about race. If it is, it's mostly driven by what they've seen on the television or what they've heard from different magazines and news reports. The only racism that exists in this country is coming from the left. I think that we really need to, point this out, and we need to highlight this. Racism in this country is coming from the left. Not to say that we don't have pockets of problems here or there. Not to say it doesn't rear its ugly head. But the only institutions that it exists in are Democrat-run institutions. They're pushing the narrative. Once again, I don't have these, when I'm seeing in the New York Times, when I'm reading about in the Huffington Post, Slate magazine, all of these leftist-driven magazines is not part of my reality. It's not part of my kids' realities. It would be almost demonic for me to tell my kids not to trust white people or not to trust, Asian people. It's absurd. And what they're doing is continuing to stir the pot, continuing to stir a narrative that really, in the real world, in the real America, doesn't exist. I have a saying that I live by. It's only racist if you want it to be. Now, have I been proven wrong? Yeah, a few times in my life, I have. I want to think that it wasn't racism, but it was. So then when I found out what it was, I acted accordingly. But I don't live my life with a chip on my shoulder that's driven by racism. And far too many lefties, far too many Americans of African descent have that chip on their shoulder, and they fall back on that chip instead of dealing with the real challenges in their life. Instead of worrying about themselves and then their neighbors. They're worried about people on the other side of the country. They're worried about people they'll never meet in their lives. And they go through these symbolic gestures that mean bullshiggity. They mean nothing. Absolutely nothing. You kneeling down for oppression means nothing. But I'm seeing it all over the place now. And it's disturbing to me because far too many people are buying into what they're seeing on TV. I have a suggestion. Whenever something racial comes up, cut off the TV set. And you will find your blood pressure drop. You will find yourself begin to, oh man, you know what? Things are not as bad as I thought they were, because they're not. They're really not. Do we have problems in different cities across the country? Yeah, we do. But most of these problems are coming out of a belief system, out of a devotion to, out of an enforcement of liberal policies. Once we vanquish liberalism from the land, you will see the whole race issue magically heal itself. But right now, far too many people use it as a weapon. Far too many people use racism as a way to keep people in line, to keep people divided, and to keep inserting their own power and authority where they have none. This is the only card they have left, it seems. That and the whole, of digging up 40-year-old stories of sexual impropriety, unless you're a Democrat. If you're a Democrat, well, you have pretty much free reign. But that may be changing as well. All of this, what we're seeing, I think, is still part of the liberal implosion. That's why we're seeing so much about race. That's why Colin Kaepernick is the GQ Community Man of the Year instead of J.C. Watts, who raised, how many millions of dollars for flood relief. That's why we're seeing the Rachel Dolezals and the Sean Kings of the world getting far more press than they need to be getting, because they're not real, are they? They're what the left wants you to think black people are. They're what the left wants you to think how black people act. But we don't all act like that. I don't even like throwing the we in there, because I don't consider myself as a black man. I consider myself as an American of African descent, but I'm an American first. Let us all celebrate the fact that we are Americans. Continue to pray for the country. It may get a little bit worse before it gets better, but it will get better. All right.